Okay, so we're back. We're going to continue our nutrition discussion to some degree. And again, remember that what we're doing is very foundational to your nutritional class, but it's also foundational to what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about how you get your nutrients, macro, micro, everything, from the point of putting them in your mouth first to the bloodstream. We'll do that this term with digestion and absorption. Then, next term, we're going to talk about how we turn those nutrients into energy, a consistent, sustained, available supply of ATP for your cells. So, again, we'll do a little bit of background to all that. So, what we're really talking about is energy balance. Our bodies use energy in several different forms: chemical, electrical, mechanical, thermal. So, I know you did it in high school. You talked about taking the energy from the sun, going through photosynthesis. So the plants grow from that, get their energy that way. The cow eats the plant, and so on. So we won't go through all that again. But the end products used by plants, the water, the carbon dioxide, or the molecules used by the plants, the water and CO2, are actually the end products of metabolism in the body. So we're going to start with glucose. It's just the typical traditional place to start. And we're going to talk about how we make that sustained, available supply of ATP for our cells. So we have two kinds of reactions and processes going on. And we talked about this before. We can have anabolic reactions that take small molecules and make big molecules. We can have catabolic that take big molecules and make small molecules. So our story is going to cover a lot of things, a lot of different aspects. We're going to talk about when food's not available, where the body will draw its energy from. So we're not only going to talk about the sources of fuel, food, fats, carbs, proteins, we're going to talk about a storage aspect to that story. So we've alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about the particular molecules, but we're going to really get into it. Glycogen, the molecule that we said is kind of sort of a whole bunch of glucoses hooked together, and I'm very calculated at saying that about it because what I want you thinking about glycogen when we get to it and start applying it is that it's a place to save extra glucose when I have extra glucose. It's a place to get glucose when I'm running low on glucose. It's also our short-term storage. So we'll say things like think quick when it comes to glycogen, meaning it's a place to put extra glucose quickly. It's a place to get glucose when we need it quickly. So that's our short-term storage. Our long-term storage is our adipose or our fat tissue. Once we fill up our glycogen, if we keep adding fuel, we'll make fat, we'll get fat. So that's our long-term storage. So we're also going to have a time frame in this story. We've got to max out our glycogen before we add to our adipose tissue. We're also the other way around. Before we can break down our own fats, we've got to empty out our glycogen. So there'll be a time frame, order of operations aspect to our stories. Muscle is not meant to be stored energy. We can get fuel from it, but that's not its purpose. And that's going to be kind of an interesting thing with proteins. We don't have any protein in us whose primary purpose of existence is to be a fuel molecule. There are proteins that we'll access and use as fuel, but it's more of a secondary purpose. So we'll talk about that too. So we're going to talk about food energy measurement, and we're going to count and account for ATP. How many do we make? How many do we make from this food, that kind of thing? How many does it cost us to make this many? So we'll always have that accounting project going. But in everyday language, we measure the energy in food in calories. And again, remember it's big C calories or a science kilocalorie. So there's a number of ways of measuring those calories. One is by doing calorimetry, and some of you guys did this in general chemistry lab. So this is where you take a couple of, I don't know, cornflakes, totally dehydrate them so you can weigh them and just be weighing cornflake, not weighing water too. Put them in a bomb calorimeter, light them on fire, and put that in water, a known quantity of water, and see what temperature change you get. You haven't lived, you haven't done general chemistry if you don't get to light stuff on fire. So based on how many degrees of change you get, you can back calculate how much energy was contained in those cornflakes. So that's a direct measurement. Very often the measurement isn't done directly. It's done by doing an estimate, calculating the kilocalories based on how much carb, how much fat, how much protein is in that food. Okay, so we're going to talk about this energy and where it goes. Next try, we're going to be all about moving energy. And that's great. We get whatever number of ATP. What do we do with them? Well, we do a number of different things with them. We have a lot of different places that energy goes. And you'll see this in physiology. But again, we're just kind of pulling out parts that might be useful to have when you're looking at the chemistry section. So we have three components of our energy, or the energy we need. We do three different things with it. Part goes to our basal metabolic rate. We'll talk about that. Part goes to the thermal effect of food. Part goes to our physical activity. So the food we ingest goes a number of different places. Some of it goes just to heat, and we'll talk about how we make heat, well, not make, but generate heat rather than ATP. Some of it goes to digestion. There's a cost of doing business to everything from chewing your food to moving it through your digestive tract to making the enzymes, making saliva, everything you need to do, doing your absorption. So there's a cost of doing business there. And it's generally estimated as roughly 10% of the calories of your food. Some of it's captured chemically. That's our wheelhouse. That's our ATP. Some of it just isn't digestible by us, so some of it will pass right through. So let's do some terminology. We're going to talk about basal metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate. For our purposes, we are going to call them synonymous. And they're not, but very rarely would you get a question that would offer both, but it's a higher possibility of getting a question that should give you one as an option and gives you the other one instead. So in that case, call them synonymous. We're going to talk about specific dynamic action, or same thing, the thermal effect of food. That's your cost of doing business, cost of processing your food. We'll also talk about total energy expenditure or total daily energy expenditure. Really the same thing, just the units expressed differently. Okay, the first one is basal metabolic rate. It's the amount of energy required just to keep you alive. Do the things that right now keep you alive. Your heart beating, your kidneys filtering, your lungs breathing, that kind of thing. So it's the energy needed to fuel just your vital stuff. Resting metabolic rates often used in clinical settings, so some of you guys have done the work to measure that. It doesn't require you to be fasted. So it's a little bit easier to measure. So for our purposes, we'll call them synonymous. The difference is less important than handling questions, I guess. So it's the amount of energy needed to run vital organs, not including the digestive system, or RMR, of course, will take in the digestive system. Again, with the acronyms, make sure you know what the acronym means. You might get asked about basal metabolic rate. Get basal metabolic rate as an option, basic, mechanical, whatever, I don't know. Just stuff that all would fit the BMR acronym. So always be very, very careful with abbreviations and acronyms. Make sure you know what they stand for, and especially with the acronyms, be very, very sure in case you get offered as a distractor something else that fits the acronym. So we're going to talk about what affects BMR. Measurement of BMR requires really strict conditions. RMR is not as strict. So again, that's why it's often used in clinical settings. So the effect of food, we'll talk about that also. Thermal effect of food is also known as specific dynamic action. So when I give you synonyms, it's not that I want to make you learn more stuff and remember more stuff. You have enough stuff to learn and remember. I do it because I think there's equal-ish probability of you seeing either one. So this is the cost of doing business, the caloric energy cost of taking your food from the point at which you put it in your mouth to the point at which it's available ATP for your cells. So that's everything from the muscles that chew, the muscles that pass the food through your digestive tract, making saliva, making enzymes, making whatever else you need to make, stomach acid, just anything that you need to take that food from the point at which it goes into your mouth to the point at which it's available energy for your cells. So this is the increment of energy above the resting metabolic rate that you need to do what you need to do. Take your food and convert it into ATP. It's often estimated for a rough calculation to be 10% of the caloric value of that food. And of course, I'm really leaning on the word estimate with that. Fat's much easier to process, so it's going to be much lower. Protein can be more difficult to process, and there's variation within each one. So what's really interesting is when somebody's talking about the latest, greatest diet plan. And what's always interesting is to look at it and see what are they trying to hack in the biochemistry. I mean, you can't beat biochemistry is what it comes down to. So one that I read about is quite a while ago was the raw celery and grapefruit diet. So the basis of this is that the thermal effect of raw celery and grapefruit, so the cost of processing raw celery and grapefruit is more than the calories you're actually going to get from those. So if you live on raw celery and grapefruit, you're going to lose weight because you're going to burn more calories eating them than you're going to get from them. I know you're thinking a million other issues with that, but what that idea was trying to hack was the thermal effect of the food. And when patients come to you with other diet strategies, look at it. What are they trying to hack in the biochemistry or in the physiology aspect? Okay, so let's talk about total daily energy expenditure or total energy expenditure, just quick. So it's made up of different things, and of course, who you are and what you're doing. We'll put some variation in our little pie chart, but a lot of your fuel goes to your BMR, keeping you alive, running your vital organs, your vital functions. Some of it, like we said, roughly 10%, goes to processing your fuel. The rest goes to physical activities. So when you add all of that up, your BMR, your cost of processing your fuel, and the energy needed for your physical activities, you're going to get your total energy expenditure. So this can be expressed a couple of different ways. It can be the amount of energy I need per day, which would be my total energy expenditure, or it can just be an energy number. That's my total daily energy expenditure. So what I'm doing, I'm either putting day in the quantity itself, or I'm putting day in the term. So it's the same thing, it's just whether you want to say total daily is or total is this per day. Okay, so basal metabolic rate, the amount of energy it takes to keep you alive, is affected by a few different things. So it's going to keep your vital organs doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's going to keep your body temperature where it needs to be. It's the amount of energy that it takes to do all that, make new cells if you need them, just the vital stuff. But it's influenced by several things. And we're going to call an effect an effect. And what I mean by that is whether it's a primary effect or a secondary effect, it's still an effect. So one of the biggest effectors on your BMR is body composition. So how much lean tissue, muscle you have versus how much fat you have. It takes more energy to run muscle. Muscle has more mitochondria. Mitochondria make, move, use the energy. So mitochondria require more fuel to do that. So the more muscle I have, the more mitochondria I have, the more energy I need. So more muscle, the higher my BMR is going to be. Next one's a little bit of a secondary effect. When do I have more muscle? When I'm younger or when I'm older? As we age, unfortunately, we tend to lose muscle and gain fat. So the older you get, the slower your BMR or lower your BMR tends to be. Height, tall, thin people have a higher BMR. It's a surface area to volume ratio. In times in your life when you're growing, you tend to have a higher BMR. Whether you're a little baby growing up to be a big baby or a big baby to a little kid, or maybe a pregnant mom growing a whole new human being, you're going to have a higher BMR. Like we said, age, BMR tends to decrease as we age. BMR can increase during periods of emotional stress, a fight or flight response. Environmental temperature can raise your BMR, again, kind of a stress response. Fasting or starvation, your BMR tends to decrease. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Malnutrition is an extreme form of fasting or starvation, decreases your BMR. The thyroid gland is the major regulator of your BMR. It's kind of a longer conversation than what really fits here, and it's something we're going to spend a pretty decent amount of time on in endocrinology. So I'd rather leave it to then, because what we're going to talk about is T3 and T4, the two major thyroid hormones, how they act and react, and what they do to your metabolism, very specifically. So we'll leave that conversation till then. Smoking, caffeine, and sleep can also be effectors on your BMR. So again, size, tall, thin people, body composition, we talked about those. Breastfeeding moms tend to have a higher BMR because of the energy cost of the breastfeeding. Exercise increases your BMR. It increases your muscle. We have to feed the muscle, more mitochondria. Gender, men tend to have a higher BMR, but again, who has more muscle, men or women? So a little bit of a secondary effect. Okay, next thing is respiratory coefficient. So we were a little ahead of ourselves on this, but we'll talk about it. And Dr. Krabbe in Nutrition will talk about it too. So for now, it's going to be a take my word for something that we're going to go back and you're going to see and prove to yourself. For a lot of the metabolic processes that we're going to do, we need oxygen. So we need oxygen for aerobic processes. As a result of the aerobic process, we're going to produce carbon dioxide. So what the respiratory coefficient or quotient is the amount of CO2 eliminated with respect to the amount of oxygen consumed. Depending on what your fuel is, that will vary. If your fuel is purely carbohydrates, it's going to be a 1. If your fuel is purely purely fats, it'll be down to about 0.7. We're not going to make as much CO2 for the oxygen used for fats. Since most of our diets are a combination of fat, carb, and protein, most of us end up somewhere in between on that. Okay, your cost of processing food. Let's revisit it for a minute. The activities related to digestion need energy to be able to do that. GI muscles make enzymes, transport everything through your digestive tract. Like we said, it's estimated to be roughly 10% of your energy intake. If we're assuming your energy intake is 2,000 food calories per day or 2,000 kilocalories, real science calories, kilocalories per day, then that makes our specific dynamic action or thermal effect of the food around 200. We're going to talk later about adaptive thermogenesis. We're going to talk about how we can very quickly generate heat. Some of our energy goes to heat. So we're going to use more energy in periods of stress, extreme cold, overfeeding, trauma, things like that. And we're going to talk about a concept called non-shivering thermogenesis. It's a response to the cold that occurs in brown fat and increases the BMR in an effort to just purely produce heat when we need it. So kind of cool chemistry, because what we're going to do is uncouple a couple processes, stop kind of before our last step, and make heat rather than ATP. Okay, so next few slides are a little bit about putting the pieces together. So one of the things about this class, like we said, is none of the concepts are difficult. None of the concepts are particularly challenging. However, your challenge with it is putting the pieces together. So there's little checkpoints here and there where we try to do that. So the next few slides are going to be about processes we haven't done yet. So for now, I wouldn't get too concerned about them. We'll talk about them a little bit. But after we've done them, and you have just reactions and enzymes and stuff swimming in your head, it's a good time to come back and say, oh, well, that's how that fits with that kind of thing. So the next few slides we're going to do rather quickly because that's what their purpose is, a kind of putting together the pieces. So we're going to take carbohydrates, take fats, take proteins, throw in some vitamins and minerals, and some water, and we're going to have a consistent, available supply of energy for our cells. Sometime we'll have a little 20-minute discussion on ethanol, just some really interesting chemistry, so we'll do that. Our unit of energy, we're not going to do any calculations other than our counting and accounting for ATP. So our unit of energy, in a way, is going to be ATP. How many ATP did we make? How many ATP did we use? That kind of thing. We could just as easily use joules, kilojoules, calories, kilocalories. Really, the difference is a unit conversion. So energy is going to go in the form of fats, carbs, proteins, maybe some alcohol. Will come out in the form of BMR or 4 or BMR. For a thermal effect of food, specific dynamic action, maybe we need some heat, maybe some adaptive thermogenesis. We're also going to tell a story. We're going to do digestion and absorption, but we're going to tell a story of taking big molecules, turning them into little molecules, which is our digestion, really, a very, in a nutshell, over, 40,000 foot view of digestion. We're going to absorb the little molecules. So when we do this, and we've talked about this in other videos, We're going to start with the big molecule, make it the little ones, but by the time we make it the little one, we'll have talked about how to turn that little one into ATP. So it's kind of our highway analogy. So we're going to focus very much on turning our monosaccharides into ATP. First glucose, then we'll do the on-ramp few reactions to get fructose into a molecule we've already seen between taking glucose from the point of being glucose to being ATP. Then we'll do the same thing with galactose. Then we'll go to our disaccharides and break them down and say things like, okay, well, when I break up sucrose, it's glucose and fructose. I know what to do with those. When I break up lactose, it's galactose and glucose. I know what to do with those. When I break up maltose, it's two glucoses. I know what to do with those. So we build the story that way. So digestion is big molecules to little molecules. Our story of making ATP, starting with the little ones, then backing back to the big ones. Then we'll go to our polysaccharides, our starches, our glycogen. Break it down into glucoses. When we get to that point, we'll know what to do with it. Same thing with our fats or our oils. The distinction there is that we call it a fat if it's solid at room temperature. We call it an oil if it's liquid at room temperature. But we'll break those down too. We talked a little bit ago in the last video that a triglyceride is a molecule of glycerol with 3 fatty acids attached to it. That's our big molecule or transport molecule. That's our ester bond connecting them and everything. So we had that conversation. What we're going to do there is big molecule to little molecule. Break the fatty acids off, turn those into ATP, turn the glycerol into ATP. So again, big molecule to little molecule, process the little molecule. We talked about fatty acids a little bit, and this is another throw down the gauntlet kind of thing. We said when we have the fatty acid with no double bonds, it's saturated. We have double bonds in there, it's unsaturated. Where we didn't go is one double bond is a monounsaturated, multiple double bonds is a polyunsaturated. In the next conversation, when we talk about fatty acids and lipids, other lipids, we'll talk about how a fatty acid could be an omega-3, omega-6, and so on. But let's have our gauntlet conversation. So what makes it an omega-3 or an omega-6 is we count in from the methyl end and look for where the first double bond is. And so it's a structural thing. And we'll draw it and we'll talk about it. And we'll do that in the fatty acid section next. But omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are thought to be important for our cardiovascular health, or, depending on what research you believe, our health in general. So here's the gauntlet thing. A lot of researchers believe that we evolved when we were foraging for roots and berries on a roughly equal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. Then along came the king and the clown, the Burger King and Ronald McDonald, and we started eating our food out of paper. And rather than a 1-to-1 ratio, we're anywhere from a 10-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 to a 20 to 25 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, meaning we're deficient on omega-3 fatty acids or we're way overloading our omega-6 fatty acids. So what does that cause? Nobody will argue that that puts you in a pro-inflammatory state. We're going to talk about how you get in a pro-inflammatory state and what that means. That'll be a separate video. I'm not sure if it'll be try 1 or try 2. It's some really interesting chemistry, so we'll get it in there somewhere. So, and we'll talk about what molecules you're making and what that is. Here's what you need to decide. What does that cause? Does it simply cause heart disease? Not that I'm minimizing that. Or does it cause every condition known to mankind? Arthritis, degenerative conditions, diabetes, lupus, respiratory conditions, gingivitis, stuff in your teeth, everything. And again, this is going to be a patient thing. You're going to have a patient that you're going to say, oh, you need to take fish oil. Why, doc? Why should I take fish oil? What's your answer going to be to that? What you discover, decide, conclude from doing this research will determine that answer. Then the other thing, from a practice management point of view, you want that patient buying the gallon bottle of fish oil at the end, on the end cap or from the end cap at Costco? Or what do you want them taking? You have some research to do there. You might want to carry those supplements in your office. Carrying supplements in your office has gotten so simple now because you can drop ship. In the past, like when I was practicing, I was trying to figure out how much of what should I order that I'm going to need before it expires. And you guys don't have to worry about that. Drop ship everything. So that gives you more control. You figure out what the fish oil is that you'd like your patients to take, the one that has the quality that you like. They can they can buy it from you. You can drop ship it. They're getting a quality supplement. You know what they're taking. So you have a little more control over it that way. So anyway, why should I take fish oil? If you're going to tell me to take it, what's it going to prevent? So go do some research on that. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Okay, then the last thing we'll do, well, not last thing, but we'll do carbs first, then fats, then proteins. We'll have some other stuff to do after that. So the last of the three that we'll do will be amino acids. So we're going to talk about breaking proteins down into amino acids and then what to do with those. How we're going to turn them into an energy source if we choose to do that. We can convert them to glucose. We can convert them to ketones. So we'll talk about how we get ketones, what reactions we do, and what's going in the cell to make us make ketone bodies. You might not want to make them. You might make them as a result of a particular pathology going on, or you might put yourself in the situation where you intentionally make them for a particular reason. And we'll talk about that. People who intentionally go into ketosis. Some really interesting science there. Okay, alcohol. It'll be about a 20-minute conversation when we do that, but it's some really interesting chemistry too. So we'll talk about alcohol. Okay, this is going to be kind of a talk in off the ledge conversation before you get out on the ledge. We have a few of those. So we're going to have some anabolic processes and we're going to have some catabolic processes. We're going to make stuff and we're going to break stuff. And what you're going to find if you pay attention to the making and the breaking is they're not going to be exactly opposite to each other. They're going to be awfully, awfully similar. Maybe analogous would be a good word for that. So the reason I'm pointing this out is when we make something and then when we go to break it, don't approach the breaking, if it's the second thing we do, totally cold. And I'm saying that for two reasons. One is it's more work than you need to do. If you find the trends, that'll save you some work. The reversible stuff will just reverse and things. Also, if you approach it cold and don't look for the trends, the similarities, you'll see something that is reversible, not recognize that it's reversible, and confuse yourself. Well, does this enzyme take me in the making direction or the breaking direction? Which one? What's the one for the other direction? When it turns out to be the same one because that part of the process is reversible. So we'll do that, and I'll kind of chase you into, put whatever in your notes here to say we're going to use the same reaction going the other way in the opposite process. We'll talk about energy, and again, let me remind you, an anabolic reaction might be endergonic, it might be exergonic, might need energy, might give you energy. So don't start trying to say anabolic is one or the other, catabolic is one or the other. You'll be right sometimes and you'll be wrong a lot of the time on it. So some of the stuff we're going to do is we'll make glycogen, we'll make triglycerides, we'll make proteins. We're also going to break glycogen down, break triglycerides down, break proteins down. So again, we'll point out the reversible parts and the commonalities to kind of help you narrow things down. Okay, this is super important. We have some rules, kind of some rules of engagement. And I guess a better way of saying it is we have characteristics of metabolic pathways. Like so many rules, they're the things that just make stuff work. So these are the pathways that are going to make us that continuous available supply of ATP for our cells. So they have some characteristics. They're irreversible. And again, that's just kind of making stuff work for us. We can't just turn around a pathway because we feel like it. So they're irreversible. Every pathway has a committed step. It's kind of like if you jump off a cliff, you can't get halfway down and turn around and say, bad idea. Let me go back and reconsider this. You're going. So we have steps like that if we do it, we're going. Metabolic pathways are regulated. This one's huge. We're going to make what the cell needs and not make more of what it already has. Well, how do we do that? By regulation. How do we regulate? By activating and inhibiting enzymes, making our molecules go into the reactions and the processes that make us the stuff that we need. Keeping them from going into or keeping the reactions or the processes that make the stuff we already have, so therefore don't need, keeping those from happening. Here's a big one, and this is kind of one of your aha moments of the whole course. Some metabolic pathways are compartmentalized. So we said one of the hard parts of this class is realizing that we have lots of stuff going on in lots of cells, lots of tissues, lots of organs at the same time, because our one-track academic minds think that the one step we're focused on is the only thing going on anywhere, and we have to finish that step before we do the next one and finish that before we do the next one. We just think that way. We learn that way. But all this stuff is going on multiple times over in different places. We can also have processes with opposite purposes going on in different places. Like I could be taking something out of storage in the liver, blocking my energy-making processes in the liver, sending the molecule out into the bloodstream to a target tissue where I'm going to make energy. So I'm blocking make energy in one place and I'm firing up make energy in another place. So that's the one that can be a real aha moment sometimes, because if you're not looking at the big picture, if you're single-mindedly focused like we tend to be on this molecule, this enzyme, whatever, you can lose that and you'll be sitting there thinking, well, I can't be doing both at once. Yeah, you can in two different places. So we'll talk about that, and that's the part that makes this kind of satisfying, because you see overall what we're trying to do with all the details, the reactions, the enzymes, and everything. So really important that you know this slide. Okay, and not important yet that you know this one, because you're going to learn it without meaning to. Knowing that slide is what's going to make you able to take this glucose and say, what do I do with it? Where did I get it? Am I going here? Am I going here? Did I get it from here? Did I get it from here? That's all about regulation, all about what's the point of the process, what's going on in the cell, what does the cell have, what does the cell need. That's also what's you're going to use in each individual process. So we're not going to spend very much time on the next couple of slides. These are the kind of really in after the fact. So with each process, what we'll do is we'll do the 40,000 foot view, and here's the overall, here's the point. Then we'll get into the nitty gritty details. Then we'll back out, and look at how each process fits in with another process. And this will help you with the fit in part. Okay, the next step we'll do after we do that, after we take carbs to ATP, fats to ATP, and proteins to ATP, we'll go back and we'll say, oh, hang on here. We can do some into converting, some we can't do. We can turn carbs to fat, and we do. That's how we make fat. That's how we store the extra carbohydrate that we eat in a long-term storage. So we'll get into some of the interconversion there, what we can do, what we can't do. So all of this stuff, the big picture view, going into the details, back to the big picture, back to how they relate, the regulation, doing what the cell needs, not doing what the cell or making more of what the cell already has, is what's going to get you through something like this. And right now, looking at it, you're thinking, oh no, where do I start? But when we do all that stuff and we apply all of that stuff, you'll know exactly where you start. And I'll be able to say to you, this is what you consumed. This is the situation in the cell. You have energy, you need it, whatever. And you'll say, oh, okay, here's where I go on this. So it's really pretty cool when all the pieces come together and you're able to do that. When we do metabolism, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw kind of a pared down version of this. And we'll draw kind of like a roadmap, like call it a roadmap. We'll draw it like a roadmap, and it'd be like, let's say we're driving up the East Coast. And it does a couple of things. It tells you where to go, like go from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina to North Carolina, and so on. But when we first draw it, it'll be like you've never made that drive. And I'll explain it like, just put Georgia down. You'll know about Georgia when you get there. But for now, just kind of take my word, Georgia's next, and then South Carolina. So when you first draw it, it'd be like drawing this. And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about here, but okay. So you'll draw it. Then what it lets us do is two things. When we get all the pieces done, you'll see how they fit together. Because if I said to you, we're going to Maine, we're going to Virginia, we're going to New Hampshire, and we're going to Georgia, and you didn't know the East Coast, you would know what we were doing. But if you know the East Coast, you know where they all fit in. That's what we're going for. The other thing that map does is, let's say we're driving from Port Orange to South Carolina today. And then tomorrow when we start driving, I'm able to say on the map, okay, we're in South Carolina. See here on the map where we are. We've done the Florida to here. Today we're going to Delaware. So we'll drive to Delaware. So we're able to point at the map and say we're here, but we're going there. Then we're picking up there and going, the next step. So we draw that map first, then do all the parts, then we draw it again at the end. So we draw it first so you know where you're going. We go, let you get kind of all over the place, drowning in the details, then we draw it again to reel you back in. So after we do that, and you look at this PowerPoint again, you'll see the little blurb on each process, like, oh yeah, I know that. And you'll look at this and say, no big deal. You'll have drawn your version of it a couple times. You'll have done all these processes, and you'll just see it fitting together again. So, like I said, a lot of what we do this try is setting up for next try. That was a lot of this stuff. So we'll go ahead, do that next try, and I'll send you back to this PowerPoint and say, remember that? You'll look at it entirely differently then. So we'll stop here, and the next place we're going to go on to, we're actually going to set you up on a vitamin project, then we'll move on to digestion after that.